Rendiamo omaggio a italiani in fiamme come la brillante scienziata Fabrizio, che ha aiutato il virus Ebola a dare alla luce la sua bimba nello spazio.
Hello guys, this is episode 5 of season 6 of Italian Politician of the Week. I am Ipernik, the Great is Silent, and today we are talking about Alcide De Gasperi. Let's begin with historical November. Ever since I made the video on Enrico De Nicola, the first president of the Republic of Italy, I have regretted not spending more time talking about Alcide De Gasperi, who is in many ways the father of Italy's parliamentary system. De Gasperi was the last prime minister of the Kingdom of Italy and the first Prime Minister of the Italian Republic. He will be so from 1946 up until 1953 in 8 separate cabinets. The dynamics of each are just as interesting as the last, but if I had to guess, you are probably more interested in the events that led to this virtually unknown man becoming the most important in Italy's early contemporary history. So let's begin with his origins. De Gasperi was born in South Tyrol in 1881. Curiously enough, back then this region wasn't part of Italy, but of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, though De Gasperi's Italian roots are far from questionable. In 1905, he graduated in literature at the University of Vienna, where he was actually the head of an Italian student group that hoped to bring Italian lessons at the university, although without much success, since the Austrians were not keen to the Italians back in the day. In 1911, De Gasperi ran for the Austrian parliament as a representative of the Popular Party of South Tyrol, which represented the Italian Catholic minorities of the empire. He was elected with around 3,000 preferential votes. Out of the 4,000 the entire party had won in total. De Gasperi maintained his status as Austrian parliamentarian up until 1919, when South Tyrol was occupied by the Italians and he was granted Italian citizenship alongside the entire population of the area. De Gasperi initially hoped that Italy would enter the war alongside Austria-Hungary and Germany on the basis of the Triple Alliance. When this did not happen, he undertook to at least maintain Italian neutrality, since he knew that the people of South Tyrol were loyal to the Austrian crown, but probably wouldn't be as much after being forced to fight against other Italians in a 4-year-long war. During the conflict, De Gasperi didn't enlist, but dedicated himself to the well-being and management of refugees of both sides. During his time, he had the chance to witness the empire's discrimination and repression towards the Slavs. Such experience made De Gasperi reevaluate his pre-war positions and became a strong supporter of national self-determination. In 1921, he moved to Rome, where he joined Italy's Popular Party, the first Christian democratic party in Italy, which had just been founded by Luigi Sturzo, another interesting politician who was also a priest. De Gasperi was elected into parliament that same year, when he had the misfortune of seeing Mussolini's rise to power. Sturzo and the boys initially allied with Mussolini in 1922. Even some of their ministers and undersecretaries were members of the party. However, in April 1923, the IPP left the cabinet, seeing the way the fascists treated the opposition. Sturzo will later resign from party secretary after the Vatican endorsed Mussolini's regime, promoting De Gasperi to party secretary in his stead, until 1926, when parties which weren't fascist were made illegal. For the next 20 years, De Gasperi will live in a state of borderline illegality and poverty, with his wife and 4 daughters. Despite the fact that he had stopped his political activism, De Gasperi refused to sign up to the fascist party throughout the duration of the regime. For this, he will often be bullied and persecuted by the fascist authorities. The discrimination went as far as sending him to jail for 2 years for simply having an outdated passport, which he couldn't even update at the time because it that required him to be signed up to the fascist party. After getting out of jail in 1928, he took odd jobs here and there until in 1929, when the Vatican took him in as a librarian. Now, finally safe inside the church's walls, De Gasperi would spend his spare time writing for various newspapers, particularly the Vatican magazine, The Vatican Illustration, using the pseudonym The Spectator. This went on until 1942, when the fascist regime started to show its first signs of weakness, and De Gasperi started to wonder if soon Italy was going to be free again. In September 1942, future members of Democrazia Cristiana started to meet up in secret at the house of Catholic businessman Giorgio Enrico Falk. Most of the future faces of DC attended these meetings, some of which are deserving of a video of their own. There were former colleagues of De Gasperi in the Popular Party, like Piccioni, Gronchi and Scelba, the then members of Azione Cattolica, a political association that could exist only because it was also religious. Among the most notables, we have the young Moro and Andreotti. Next, from the Catholic University Federation, there were Fanfani and Dossetti. There were many more minor appearances, such as Enrico Mattei, the future founder of ENI, and Giuseppe Alessi, first regional president of Sicily. But listing them all is going to take a while, so let's go on. In July 1943, the statute was written, but it will be officially founded in September of that year, once it achieved its legality. However, Pietro Badoglio had actually recognized them long before this, and he had asked for their cooperation in his attempt of taking over Mussolini's regime. On September 10th, the DC participated in the constitution of the National Liberation Committee, within which the party tried to take the lead of the more moderate political forces by opposing the left parties, them being the Communist PCI and the Socialist PSI. De Gasperi joined the National Liberation Committee as a representative of the Christian Democrats. During the government led by Ivanoe Bonomi, he was minister without portfolio, and in 1944, during the first party congress of Democrazia Cristiana in Naples, De Gasperi was elected party secretary. Now, the next part of the video should be about the deal the king made with the Liberation Committee, the referendum of Republic versus Monarchy, and the parliamentary constituent that wrote the constitution. However, I talked about this quite in detail in the Nicola's video, so check it out to know more about these aspects. I will continue from 1946 onwards. After the proclamation of the Republic and the nomination of De Nicola as first head of state, the constituent began to discuss the features of this new democracy. Yeah, okay, we are a republic, we got that, but are we going to be a presidential, parliamentary, or mixed system? De Gasperi pushed for a parliamentary system for a simple reason. He feared that by letting the people vote for the head of state, the socialists and the communists would team up on someone like Nenni. On the other hand, a parliamentary system would have meant harder collaborations, and since the socialists and the communists didn't see eye to eye on many things, De Gasperi saw this as the suitable battleground to make Italy a Western country rather than a red country. There were many forces of the right, most of which had supported the monarchy at the referendum, and they saw the presidential system as a preferable option, but eventually the fear of a socialist president proved persuasive enough to go along with De Gasperi's idea. The first three De Gasperi cabinets, which lasted from December 1945 to June 1947, were cabinets of national unity. The first one, which had Nenni as deputy prime minister of De Gasperi, fell with the conclusion of the referendum. The second cabinet instead fell apart in January 1947, shortly after De Gasperi went to the USA to meet Truman without telling Nenni, who was foreign minister at the time. The trip was really important because it was what separated Italy from getting a huge loan for rebuilding the economy. If Nenni had gone there instead, Truman would have refused to pay, and Italy's economy might have not been able to endure the pressure. Due to this enormous blunder, Giuseppe Saragat caused a secession in the Socialist Party, giving birth to the Social Democratic Party, who were more moderate. The third cabinet instead fell apart when the PSI and the PCI started giving trouble to De Gasperi Gasperi over his economic policy, which admittedly was cutting a lot of costs without seeing many results. In response to their complaints, after making sure that the USA was on their side, De Gasperi kicked Togliatti and Nenni out of the alliance, hence dooming them to the opposition. The socialists were left out of governance for about 20 years, while the communists never set foot at any ministry for the rest of the First Republic. With the new funds coming from the West and the total independence from the left, De Gasperi built his fourth cabinet, composed of great ministers such as Einaudi in balance, Sforza in foreign affairs, Pella in finance, and Tremelloni in industry and commerce. Then, in June 1948, Einaudi was made president of the Republic, so De Gasperi made a fifth cabinet, which was basically the same as the fourth, but with Vanoni in finance and Pella in balance. The DC was very confident because in April 1948 they had won the very first election in Italy with the new constitution that had become official at the beginning of the year. Between 1948 and 1950, Italy started to see the first signs of growth. It will join the Atlantic Pact in 1949, and Mattei's oil and gas business will start to boom soon after. However, unemployment rates were still pretty high, and over the course of a few months preceding the resignation of Scelba from the Ministry of the Interior, many strikes took place, with the encouragement of the PCI. Tensions rose to the point that 6 workers were shot dead, and 51 more were injured by police during a protest in Modena. Both De Gasperi and Scelba will resign shortly after out of shame. President Einaudi, though, didn't give up on De Gasperi once again and assigned them to make a 6th cabinet, this time alongside the Republicans and the Social Democrats, in order to combat the unrest of the working classes, although without much success. Segni's agrarian reform that distributed land to the poor turned out a total flop, and Scelba's attempt of limiting the right to strike of the workers made the DC look pretty bad. Even Gramsci started to call out specific ministers and demanding their resignation for not working in favor of the people. The cabinet's good achievements in terms of foreign policy, for example the admission of Italy to the European Community of Coal and Steel, and the generally encouraging levels of economic growth, were not good enough to balance out on the electoral fraud committed by Azione Cattolica in the 1951 regional elections of Sicily and the left's aggressive opposition both in parliament and on public squares. The last drop came when Pella resigned from the Ministry of Treasury due to the harsh pressure that got to him, and the cabinet fell apart in July 1951. Despite the numerous shenanigans, De Gasperi still had his back covered by strong allies and a pretty impressive level of popular and institutional support, both from the party system and from the President of the Republic himself, at least before 1953. Things had toned down to some extent on the leftist front, but things cannot be said on the right. The MSI, the neo-fascist party, was at the time seen as a potential threat. Scelba, in response to this, made a law that still applies to this day. The Italian constitution forbids the reformation of the fascist party. What the constitution doesn't explain is what a fascist party actually is. Scelba covered that. The law clearly states that the reorganization of the dissolved fascist party occurs when an association or movement adopts the anti-democratic principles of the fascist party, exalting, threatening, or using violence as a method of political struggle, or advocating the suppression of the freedoms guaranteed by the constitution. Since the Italian social movement mostly adopted democratic ways to advocate for their ideology, according to this law, they were allowed to exist, even though they looked back at fascism nostalgically. It is also the same reason for why Forza Nuova or Casa Pound still exist today, but that is another can of worms that I can't 100% open today. The other big event that this cabinet is remembered for is the new electoral law that essentially included extra seats for whoever could get the majority of the votes, hence making sure the DC, which was the most popular party, could always get at least 50% of the seats at each election. The law will be nicknamed the Scam Law by most parties, who called it out for its unconstitutional principles. When it came time to vote for the implementation of the majority award, all the parliamentarians of the PCI and PSI are remembered for just standing up and leaving in the middle of the election, which was scandalous. This will cost a lot to De Gasperi and the DC, which will lose its absolute majority at the elections that same year, losing 42 seats in the Chamber of Deputies and 15 in the Senate. They were still the biggest party in the country, though losing 60 parliamentarians is still a big blow. De Gasperi did try to make an 8th cabinet shortly after the election, but he didn't win the vote of confidence. His successor will be Pella and later Scelba. If you want to know what they did, check out Enaudi's video. It's not as engaging as the Nicola's video, but it gets good near the end. De Gasperi had an interesting role in Pella's cabinet, so go check it out. Other than that, not much happened until his death in 1954, just 4 months after he made a speech at the European Parliamentary Conference called Europe Our Homeland, where he laid ground to the idea of a European Union alongside many other intellectuals from all over Europe. Today, De Gasperi is credited for creating the First Republic, its party system and all its dynamics. For his immense legacy, the Vatican gave him the honor of beatification, which is kind of funny since the Pope at the time hated his guts for not allowing Catholicism from being Italy's state religion, but okay. I wouldn't say this was a complete presentation of De Gasperi and a complete summary of his life and the list of all his achievements, but I'm exhausted. And the script is long enough as it is, so yeah. I hope you guys enjoyed. Thank you all for watching. Remember to like, comment and subscribe, and likewise, I will see you next time.